I used to think that being quiet was my greatest weapon. I could outlast any insult, work through any pain, and carry more than anyone ever expected. Long hours, late rent, forgotten birthdays. I took it all. But nothing in my life had prepared me for the weight of that invitation, lying on my kitchen table like it had a heartbeat of its own. The envelope was thick, ivory-colored, and embossed with gold. The kind of paper that smelled like money and tradition. Bennett Academy, Founders Gala. It read, in looping cursive. My fingers hovered over it for a second, then pulled away like it burned. I didn't have to open it. I already knew what it meant. The Bennetts, my ex-husband's family, were planning their grand celebration, 50 years of legacy, 50 years of elitism, and for some twisted reason, they wanted me to be part of it. Me. Claire Bennett, the ex-wife they never really accepted, the former school librarian they let go after the divorce under the excuse of budget cuts. I stood over the sink, cradling a chipped mug of coffee. Cold. Bitter. Liam's sneakers squeaked as he rushed into the room, backpack half-zipped, hair still damp from the shower. Mom, guess what? I got picked to represent the 6th grade at the science fair, he beamed, chest puffed out with pride. I smiled. That's amazing, baby. I'm so proud of you. He nodded, then noticed the invitation. What's that? I tried to casually shift it under a pile of unopened mail. Nothing important. He grabbed it before I could stop him. Bennett Academy Gala? That's where Grandpa and Grandma teach, right? And where Dad went? I hesitated. Yes. They're celebrating the school's anniversary. His eyes lit up. Are we going? I froze. The air in the kitchen felt heavier. Why? I asked softly. Because I miss them. I miss Dad, he whispered. And I want to show them my project. Maybe they'll be proud of me too. I looked at him. 12 years old, and already trying to earn love that should have been freely given. My chest ached. I reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. Okay, I said. We'll go. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a test. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of the gala arrived with the weight of everything I had been avoiding. I woke before the sun, the apartment still cloaked in shadows, and ironed the only semi-formal dress I owned, a faded green one with a loose hem I'd stitched myself. Liam was already dressed, wearing a too-small button-down shirt he insisted still fit. He was excited. That made one of us. The drive across town was quiet, broken only by Liam humming some tune under his breath. As the streets shifted from cracked sidewalks and bus stops to gated communities and sweeping front lawns, the distance between our current life and the one I used to know became suffocatingly clear. Bennett Academy stood tall at the heart of Palm Grove like some ivy-covered monument to perfection. Marble pillars, manicured hedges, valet parking, everything designed to impress and remind you where you did or didn't belong. We walked into the grand rotunda and were immediately swallowed by a crowd dressed in polished confidence. Men in tailored suits, women in satin and pearls, waiters weaving between them with silver trays and glasses of champagne. A string quartet played softly in the background. I felt like I was trespassing in a world I used to orbit. Never quite. Touch? I kept my eyes on Liam as he scanned the room, hoping for a glimpse of his father or grandparents. I didn't have the heart to tell him they probably wouldn't be looking for him. A woman in a navy blue blazer and headset approached us with a clipboard. Claire Bennett? She asked, her smile all function and no warmth. Yes, I replied. You and your son are assigned to table 14. That's in the side atrium. She led us away from the central ballroom, past the main banquet tables decked out in white roses and gold chargers. through a narrow hallway lined with old class portraits. Finally, we arrived at a much smaller room with fewer tables and less lighting. It felt like the overflow section, where they placed guests who didn't quite make the cut but were too politically inconvenient to exclude. I glanced at our place settings and froze. My name card read, Claire Bennett, divorced, former staff, public library worker. Liam's said, Liam Bennett, 12, parentage unverified. I blinked. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. My pulse thudded in my ears. Liam looked up at me, his voice unsure. Mom. What does that mean? I knelt beside him, my hands trembling as I tucked the card into my bag. It doesn't mean anything, I whispered. It's just a mistake. But it wasn't. Someone had gone out of their way to print those cards, to label us, to humiliate us. I sat down, my legs numb, my thoughts swirling. Around us, laughter floated through the air like perfume. I recognized former colleagues, parents, of students I once helped. No one approached. No one made eye contact. I was invisible. Or worse, an embarrassment. Then I heard the unmistakable clack of heels across marble. Vanessa appeared in the doorway like she was stepping onto a stage. Her crimson dress hugged her like it had been stitched to her skin, and her hair was swept into a perfect updo. She walked straight toward us, her smile a polished weapon. Claire, she said sweetly, leaning in to air-kiss my cheek. You made it. I stiffened. Of course. We were invited. She turned to Liam and ruffled his hair. My, look at you. So grown up. He gave her a forced smile. Vanessa straightened, eyes gleaming. You'll want to stay through the whole program. Gavin's giving a keynote and there's a surprise segment later. You won't want to miss it. With that, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. I sat frozen, nausea rising in my throat. Liam reached for my hand under the table, his small fingers wrapping tightly around mine. I tried to steady my breathing. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and the event host took the stage in the main ballroom. A few speeches followed. Alumni, donors, the school dean. Then came Gavin. He walked on stage with the ease of a man who'd never had to apologize for anything in his life. He spoke about legacy, education, and honor. People clapped, laughed, nodded. Then Vanessa took the mic. Tonight, she said, voice smooth as silk, we not only honor 50 years of academic excellence, but also those who've contributed, in less conventional ways, like my sister-in-law, Claire Bennett. My stomach dropped. She served here as a librarian for years, helping countless students. And though her journey took her elsewhere, we're so glad she found time in her schedule to join us tonight. In fact, she continued, her smile sharp, she's agreed to help guide guests through the historical archive exhibit after dinner. Who better to give us a tour than our favorite bookworm? There were a few polite chuckles. Then Diana's voice rose from one of the front tables, cutting through the air like frost. She always was more comfortable in the stacks than the spotlight. It's lovely to see her back where she belongs. Liam turned to me, his face red. They're being mean, he said under his breath. I looked at him, forcing a smile I didn't feel. It's fine, just ignore it. But it wasn't fine. Not for me, not for my son. And I had no idea that while I was swallowing that shame in silence, Liam had already decided he wouldn't. The clinking of cutlery and the murmur of small talk echoed faintly through the side atrium as I sat motionless, staring at the untouched dessert in front of me. The exhibit area Vanessa had so graciously assigned me to was already being prepared. Folding chairs, easels of blown-up yearbook pages, and an awkward little podium shoved against the wall. They'd turned me into a living prop, a decoration from a past they never respected. But Liam, he hadn't touched his food either. He sat quietly beside me, his face unreadable, His fork moved crumbs around his plate without purpose, his brows furrowed just enough to tell me he was thinking hard about something. I leaned in, brushing his shoulder gently. "Hey," I said softly. "You okay?" He looked up at me, his voice low. "Can I go look around the hallway? The one with the old class pictures?" I hesitated. "Sure. Stay where I can see you." He nodded and slipped away before I could change my mind. I let out a slow breath. Maybe he just needed a moment. I knew I did. The speeches resumed inside. I heard Vanessa's voice again, bright, rehearsed, full of fake warmth, as she moved into the closing remarks. I stood reluctantly, preparing myself for the walk toward the archive exhibit, where I'd be expected to play the helpful little librarian one last time. But then something unexpected happened. The house lights didn't dim as they normally would for the next segment. Instead, there was a quiet scraping sound, the unmistakable screech of a chair being pushed back from a table. Then, footsteps. Firm, slow, deliberate. Liam stepped into the main hall. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The spotlight that had just faded from Vanessa's figure now shifted, as if guided by fate, and landed on my 12-year-old son. He walked to the center of the room like he belonged there. "Excuse me," Liam said, his voice clear and steady. "Can I say something?" There were a few chuckles. Diana shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Gavin straightened, clearly unsure whether to indulge or shut it down. Vanessa wore the kind of smile adults reserve for children they plan to dismiss. "Just want to tell the truth," Liam said. "Since tonight's about honesty and legacy." Vanessa gave a little laugh. "Of course, sweetheart. Why don't we let your mom—" But Liam cut her off. "No," he said, pulling a small object from his pocket. "This is about what you said when you thought no one was listening." My heart dropped. I recognized it immediately. My old voice recorder. The one I hadn't used in months. It had been buried in a drawer, and I'd forgotten all about it. He raised it to the microphone, looked directly at his father, then at Vanessa, and pressed play. Static buzzed for a moment, and then their voices filled the room. Gavin's voice came first, low and smug. "Once we corner her into that pathetic display at the gala, she won't fight the custody agreement. She's barely keeping it together as is." Then Vanessa, laughing, almost giddy. "She'll be humiliated. A public servant posing as family. How poetic. And once Liam's living with us, Gavin, your record looks perfect. You'll win every client in town." Gasps rippled through the room. I felt the blood drain from my face. Diana's champagne glass trembled in her hand. But Liam wasn't done. He stepped closer to the mic, voice trembling now, but still strong. "I heard them. They said all that when they thought I was asleep in the other room. But I wasn't. I heard everything, and I don't want to live with them. I want to live with my mom. Because she doesn't lie. She doesn't use people." The room was dead silent. Vanessa lunged toward him, panic rising in her eyes. "Turn that off!" Liam recoiled, but before she could reach him, I was already moving. I stepped into the light beside my son and stood tall. My voice was calm, but firm. "Touch him, and I swear, Vanessa." Gavin tried to smooth things over. "Claire, he's just a child. He doesn't know what he's doing." "He knows exactly what he's doing," I said. "He told the truth. Something the rest of you haven't done in years." Diana finally rose from her seat. Her voice was quiet but sharp. "Is that recording authentic?" Gavin opened his mouth, closed it. Vanessa looked away. The silence was all the confirmation anyone needed. Guests were already standing. Whispers became murmurs. Murmurs became judgment. I could feel the shift in the room, like a dam had broken, and everything they'd tried to hide was pouring out. I turned to Liam, my hands on his shoulders. "That was brave," I whispered. I'm proud of you. He nodded, still shaking, but his eyes never left mine. We stood there together, the two of us in the middle of a shattered illusion, and I knew in that moment, no matter what came next, everything had already changed. We didn't stay for dessert. As guests began filing out in confused, hushed clusters, I took Liam's hand and walked us straight through the ornate double doors and down the marble steps of Bennett Academy, leaving behind the glittering chandeliers, the linen-draped tables, and the family who had done everything to make us feel small. The night air was brisk, cutting gently across my face, but it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. Liam didn't speak until we reached the car. Did I mess everything up? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. I turned to him, brushed a tear from his cheek before it could fall. No, sweetheart. You made everything right. He nodded slowly and climbed into the passenger seat. As I drove us home, the streetlights casting gold across his face, I realized something I hadn't dared to believe in a long time. We were finally free. The fallout came fast. Within days, the audio had made its way onto social media, shared anonymously at first, then picked up by a local journalist whose daughter attended the school. The story spread like fire through the Palm Grove community. The Bennetts, once untouchable, were suddenly facing scrutiny they couldn't control. Donors pulled out. Parents demanded explanations. The Academy announced a formal investigation into the administration's ethical conduct. Gavin showed up at the library 2 weeks later. He looked tired, his crisp suit doing little to hide the cracks in his confidence. He waited near the checkout desk until my shift ended, then approached me with a hesitant smile I had seen too many times before. I didn't mean for it to get so public, he said. I raised an eyebrow. But you did mean for it to get ugly, didn't you? He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I just want to talk. About Liam. About us. There is no us, Gavin, I said calmly. And Liam already said everything that mattered. You don't get to rewrite the story just because you don't like how it ends. He stood there for a moment, like he expected me to fold. But I didn't. I turned and walked away. This time, I didn't look back. A few days later, I received a letter from Diana Bennett. It was handwritten, formal, and painfully polite, filled with phrases like deep regret, misunderstanding, and hope for eventual reconciliation. I didn't respond. Some things didn't deserve closure. Some bridges were better, left in ashes. But not everything that followed was heavy. Mr. Hill, the head of the city's central library system, called me personally after the story reached the papers. He said he admired how I'd handled myself, how I'd raised a son who spoke truth to power. We could use people like you, he said. There's an opening downtown, senior librarian, full-time, with mentorship responsibilities. It's yours if you want it. I said yes before the sentence had finished leaving his mouth. Liam and I moved 2 months later into a modest 2-bedroom apartment just 10 minutes from the new library. It wasn't fancy, but it had sunlight in the mornings, hardwood floors that creaked with charm, and enough room for both of us to finally breathe. Liam painted his room dark green and lined the shelves with science kits and mystery novels. I filled the living room with thrift store finds and library bookends I'd collected over the years. For the first time in so long, our home felt like more than a roof over our heads. It felt like ours. Sometimes, I still thought about that night. About the moment Liam stepped into the light and shattered the performance his father and aunt had built so carefully. He was only 12, but in that moment, he carried generations of silence and broke it apart with just a few simple words and a recording. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it for truth. And maybe that's what made it so powerful. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes and asked, "Do you think people will still believe them?" I shook my head. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that we know who we are, and that we don't let anyone else decide our worth again. He nodded and turned over, pulling the blanket up to his chin. As I stood in the doorway watching him drift off, I thought about everything we'd been through. The humiliation, the fear, the way I had once made myself smaller to survive. And then I thought about the boy in the spotlight who refused to stay quiet, and the woman beside him who finally remembered how to stand tall. We were never meant to fit into their world. We were meant to build our own, and that's exactly what we were doing, together, one day at a time.